Fred,
okay.
you are golden. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, today we have the king of the deontological ethical theorist, and also probably the best example of using pure reason for an ethical system. And this is Emmanuel, God with us, Kant. I mean, who names their kid Emmanuel, right? Besides Mary. So we got Kant. And of course, it's called Kantian ethics. And Kant is writing about the time of the American Revolution. So we're talking late 1700s, early 1800s. He's at a little college town in Prussia called Königsberg. And I don't know, I just have these very romantic ideas of Königsberg, this perfect little German Prussian town, you know, everything's orderly, but Kant is the most orderly of them all. Supposedly people actually set their clocks by the time he walked by their house in the morning on his morning little routine. And so this guy was kind of retentive, very focused, but he used that focus to produce some amazing works. One of them being the Critique of Pure Reason, yes, and the companion manual, the Critique of Practical Reason. And this is what Kant wanted. He believed every other ethical system before his had fallen short for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons was the intention behind people's ethics. And remember, with deontology, intention is so key. Not outcomes, but why are you doing what you're doing? And what Kant points out is, whether you're looking at divine command theory or egoism or any of it, it's really about you do things that are going to benefit you and you avoid things that are going to cause you harm, which is just all egoism, right? All over again. And so think about, in general, if I ask you guys, why do you love God? Or why do you keep God's rules? Then what would you tell me? Let's not make it so metaphysical. Let's make it simpler. This school has a lot of rules, or at least it used to. I don't know if it still does. But this school had a lot of rules. Why do you keep the community covenant? Or why don't you keep the community covenant? What's your motivation?
Respect or self-interest?
Well, which is it?
Well, okay, if you keep it, it's
Those
because
are
of
really-
respect or self-interest. Because if it's best for you, it's pretty egoist.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of Kant's point. He's like, if you love God because you want to go to heaven and don't want to go to hell, or if you follow the traffic laws because you don't want to get a ticket, basically you're a moral mercenary. And you're giving your allegiance to who's offering you the best deal. Mm-hmm. So if someone gave you a better deal for doing something naughty, you would go with the naughty. Because that's what it's about for you. It's about you not being ashamed or embarrassed or you getting some payoff or reward. Avoiding punishment, seeking reward. And he says if that's what's motivating you, you're not even being ethical right out the gate. So start over, try again. And this is the key to deontology. It is so important about the intentionality of what you're doing. And I really appreciate that critique of Kant, actually. I think that is so true, where a lot of the other systems we've looked at are really just more elaborate versions of egoism. When you strip away all the layers, it's really just about the self again. And this, with being a major deontological theory, it's all about doing what's right simply because it's right, not for what you hope to get out of it. And Kant, this is kind of psychologically interesting, is he was raised, at this time in Germany, it wasn't just Lutherans and Catholics, there were a lot of little sub-sects, and I don't want to call them cults, but denominational differences. And there were like these early versions of holy rollers, sort of, like super charismatic, jump and shout, rolling down the aisles, that sort of like hyper Pentecostalism sort of thing. Whatever the German 18th century version of that was. And that's what poor Kant, this little human brain was being raised in, all these hyper emotional, spirit filled, or saying it's the spirit people. And I think Kant was just exhausted by that kind of roller coaster of when everything's going well, it means God loves you, and then when things go bad, you're being punished, or the devil's out to get you, and then when things start going good again. And Kant wanted something that was reason-based. It wasn't how you were feeling, or the circumstances, or what your mama said, or what your church said, or what your country said, but you could check in with your own mind, your own reason, to follow that compass in life. And once again, it's kind of like this would be the perfect Vulcan ethic, because it's pure reason-based. It doesn't have anything to do with emotion and all that stuff. And so Kant, using his reason, comes up with three main things for his ethic. So it's really quite simple in the sense for how complex his ethic is. He simplified it nicely. And the first thing he says is the only good thing in and of itself, not situationally good, but categorically good, is a good will. But it took me years of reading Kant and a lot of his different stuff before I actually think I understood what he meant by goodwill. He does not mean what we mean in the vernacular. So in common English, what do we mean when we say goodwill?
Right intentions?
Yeah, you have good thoughts, or you want the best for towards someone else. That is not what Kant means, even close. What Kant means by goodwill is that you possess pure, practical reason. And this is part of the difficulty of reading Kant. And I haven't read him in the German, I don't know German, but in the English translations, you can see how the translator has to have such a keen understanding of his philosophy so as not to mislead you with the meaning. And you kind of have to learn what his words mean, even in English. You have to build up kind of your own Kantian lexicon. So pure practical reason, he thinks, is the only thing that's good in its own light. And he's not talking about God. God, of course, would be good in his own light, but he's talking about here on earth, humans. But say beauty. Beauty could be good. You could use it to open doors, to bring joy in the world, but you could also use it to manipulate, to entice. Strength. You could use it to help people, or you could use it to pummel people. Intelligence. You could use it for great good, or you could be an evil genius. But pure practical reason, he believes, that is categorically good and will always produce good and right results. Now, that raises the question, well, how do we know we have pure practical reason? Well, he wrote the book on it. Now, following this, he came up with what's called the categorical imperative. And I'm going to say it to you. I don't have room to write it on the board. First, I'm going to say it to you in Kantian, and then I'm going to say it to you in English. So, in Kantian, he says, to will that your maxim be made a universal law. The categorical imperative is to will that your maxim be made a universal law. Now let me give it to you in the common tongue. Would you want all people in all places at all times, that's the universal piece, would you want all people in all places at all times to do, that's the maxim piece, the action, to do what you're about to do. It's kind of like a philosopher's golden rule. Like do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Kant's saying, ask yourself when you're about to run that red light, would I want all people in all places at all times to run red lights? Well, no, obviously. And this is the brilliance of Kant's reasoning, because you could think of 1,000 reasons why it would be okay for you as an individual, or this one-time off special exception dispensation to run a red light, but once you universalize it, you have to say no, because it would make driving homicidal. There would be it would be chaos. Same thing, you could ask the question, is it okay for me to steal food to feed my family. Now, as an individual, I could come up with 100 reasons why that might be okay in my dire circumstances. But as soon as I universalize it, would I want all people in all places at all times to steal to feed their family? I have to say no, because it would make private ownership, property, all of that meaningless, right? And so I love where his head is here. And you might think, well, yeah, but you have to have this really great reason. He believes even a child can do this. And I think he's right. This is something even a child can process. Any questions on this one? So anything like lying, stealing, torture, rape, thermonuclear warheads, it's a categorical no if you have to universalize them. Where all of those, we might be able to come up with some exception why as individuals we could do it. We can't logically universalize those things.
Oh, I actually do have a question.
Yeah.
Does he make some distinction between like actions that concern morality and actions that are just actions or amoral?
Jacob,
like,
you were just so on track. That is called the hypothetical imperative. And that's simply, if in order to get from point A to point Z, you're going to have to go through different steps or points along the way. But this isn't about ethics, it's just like if you want to accomplish something. For example, in order to get an A in this class, you have to come a certain amount of times, you have to score a certain percentage on your quizzes, get a certain percent on your midterm final, and you get an A. You could fail this class and still be an ethical person. You could get an A in this class and be the most immoral person at the school. That's not what's making you ethical or unethical. It's just saying if you want to get an A, you have to do these steps. So if I go into Baskin Robbins and I'm about to order my black walnut ice cream, I don't have to pause and say, do I want all people in all places at all times when they go to Baskin Robbins to order black walnut ice cream? Because that's not an ethical dilemma. That's a matter of taste or preference. And this is super interesting about Kant because he wants universals, and he wants universals everywhere. And so he makes a distinction between the beautiful and personal taste. He's fine with people having personal taste or preferences, but you can't universalize your subjective taste and say, well, I think Bob Dylan's music is beautiful, so therefore, ipso facto, if you're not reasoning correctly and don't agree that Bob Dylan is the most beautiful singer, composer of all times, then you're not thinking clearly. No, that would be absurd. I'm projecting my personal subjective taste onto universals. But if you listen to the music of Bach and you can't acknowledge that that is beautiful music, I'm not saying you have to like it, but if you can't acknowledge that it's beautiful, I would agree with Kant, something is wrong with your reasoning. Now, I'm not into Bach. I can listen to him special times or places, but I like Dylan. Dylan's more lowbrow. He's more where I live, down, on the open highway. Bach is like the music of the spheres, right? He's just in this transcendent place. And I'm not basing that on taste or preference. It's just because I don't prefer him, but I can, because of my reason, see that that is more beautiful than the music of Dylan. Now, I believe Dylan's a music genius, but it's a different genre, a different point. Now, if you wanted to compare like the poetry or political, social activism of Dylan or whatever, that's a different genre and you might have a different comparison. But as far as strict the purity of the music goes, I just don't think they're comparable. Let me give you another example. Michelangelo's 17-foot statue of David carved out of a single block of Carrara marble. I finally got to see that this summer for the first time. It was magnificent. And Kant would say, if you cannot look at that and acknowledge that that is a beautiful piece of sculpture, there is something wrong with your reasoning process, the way you're applying reason into the world. And I would agree with him. That doesn't mean I needed to buy a 1.5-foot statue facsimile to bring home and put on my coffee table. That would be gauche, it would be tacky, it would not go with my decor, and I'm just not doing it, right? But see, that's a difference between acknowledging the beautiful and then having like a taste thing like, oh, I want to replicate this and have my garden full of naked David statues or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so how would you distinguish then between how would you distinguish between the beautiful, what is beautiful and what is taste? Is it just like he gets to decide what is the well,
What am I writing after beautiful?
No, you're getting there.
Does he have
Great
a better
question.
reference point, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, how
Or
about
like-
you guys? Is the beautiful absolute or relative? Don't even ask me what my other class said about this one.
Well, the beautiful is absolute,
Thank you.
but we often use that word in a relative way because we use it to mean so many different things.
Right.
That's probably in English.
What's so funny is, even at this school, which is kind of, at least for California, towards the conservative end of the spectrum, the majority of the people here want beauty to be in the eye of the beholder. They see it as relative, a matter of taste.
Because we use the same word to mean both.
Right. But if you ask them about truth or the true, they want truth to be absolute at this school. And I try to explain to them, I don't think you understand the problem, or you don't understand what truth or beauty is. Because they want an absolute truth, but they want a relative beauty. And what about this, the good? And if you remember from what I've told, maybe I haven't taught you in other classes, but I think I have, for the ancient Greeks, these were all synonyms. The good, the true, the beautiful. And they were also ways of describing God. And so if you had to ask me to define what is beauty or what is the good or the true, it's all the same definition. It's also how if I dared to define God, it would be the same definition for God. That which is complete, perfect, lacking nothing. That's the beautiful, that's the true, that's the good. Yes. So Kant's fine with you having taste, just don't confuse your subjective personal taste with absolute universals. Okay? So good. That's my easiest fight to pick with postmoderns, because it's so hard to pick a fight with postmoderns because everything's so relative. They're just like, well, that's your opinion, man. But when you tell them, well, you don't even know what beautiful is, then they get offended because you're being absolute about something. So if you want to argue with relativists, you have to take an absolute position, and then they'll argue with you. But if you just say like, well, it's beautiful to me, there's no argument, right? Because you've qualified it. But if you state categorically this is true, that's how you could get in a fight at San Diego State when I went there. As long as you were just like, well, I believe, or from my perspective, or in my experience, as long as you had a qualifier, people would listen to you, and they would be tolerant of you. But if you said, no, this is the right way, and I don't care if you were an atheist, a Buddhist, an anarchist, a communist, or a born-again Christian, if you claim to have an absolute truth claim, all the other worldviews would attack you. It was so weird. It was like the intolerance of tolerance, like where tolerance had become so pervading that as long as you stayed in the taste realm, you were okay. But if you dared to deign you had an absolute objective view on anything, you would be called to the mat on it. It was really kind of interesting to watch. And I'm not saying that that's completely wrong either. I mean, Saying you have an absolute truth claim is really quite a claim. But that's what Kant's going for. I love it. Okay, in addition to the categorical imperative, what I want all people in all place, all times to do what I'm about to do, he has the kingdom of ends. And this alone makes his ethic superior to, I think, anything we've talked about so far, including natural law theory. And kingdom of ends, I'll say it to you again. The kingdom of ends says, treat others, or always treat others, as an end unto themselves, never as merely a means to an end. So good.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. Always treat others as an end unto themselves. Never, or not merely as a means to an end. In other words, don't use people. And I don't know about you guys, but every once in a while, I'll just be walking or I'll wake up in a cold sweat and you just have that tingle going down your spine. And I remember things I've done in my past. And the ones that bring me the most regret are when I've violated the kingdom of ends. When I've used other people for my own gain or my own gratification, or it's like a psychic scar that goes through your soul. It's so heinous. And I just love that Kant, for this rational intellectual to see that, I just think is spot on. Don't use other people, and can you universalize what you're about to do? That's really the heart of his ethic. And I think this one's important too, but like I said, even a child should be able to do this. And this is a picture I want to show you from Christmas. And I was just, as you guys know, my father passed this last year. And my mom didn't want to have a regular Christmas, so she wanted to go on a road trip. And I said, yeah, let's go up the coast. So we went up the coast to Monterey, and we used to live in Central California, and that's Morro Rock in the background of that top picture. And when I was 11 years old, like 45 years ago, she took me to this beach. And even 45 years ago, there were signs that said, take only pictures, leave only footprints, that sort of thing. It's a protected beach. And when I was 11 years old, I found my first live sand dollar on that beach. And I carried it around in my little bucket all day. I was so excited. And when it was time to go, my sweet mother, who basically looks the same as she did 45 years ago, unbelievable. Yeah, that's my mother. She looks like my daughter. And, she said, sweet child of mine, what are you going to do with that precious treasure you found? And I was like, I'm taking it home. And she asked me a very simple question, and I still can't believe it. She asked me this. She said, sweet child, what would happen if every precious boy who found a beautiful treasure like yours took it home in his little bucket? And even at 11 years of age, I could process that. And without being told what to do, I carried that little sand dollar back to the beach and let it go on the shoreline. And that's why I was so geeking out 45 years later when we show up at this beach and it is literally covered in thousands upon thousands of live sand dollars. And I wanted to take some credit for that, but it really goes to my dear mother and Kant, because that was the thought behind that. And I'm just like, wow, that is so interesting. She didn't bribe me. She didn't say, honey, if you put it back, I'll get you an ice cream cone. Moral mercenary. She didn't say, put that back right now or I'm going to beat your butt. Moral mercenary, right? It was pure reason calculating out projected consequences of my action and realizing I did not want that for me, for others, or the sand dollars. It's beautiful. And see, I don't know about you guys, but when ethics and morality are imposed on you from the outside, it does something to me. It makes me want to act up. But when I'm operating from an internal moral compass that's coming from the inside out, I'm following my own guide, right? My own conscience, my own star. But it may have even been something I was following my own light in, but when someone from the outside tells me I have to do it, I'm just like, well, I'm doing something else. Steve Whitten, God bless him, learned this early on about me, and he has almost never told me to do or not to do anything. He's knows how to like coax me and get me to kind of process through it instead of just saying, thus saith the Lord, or thus saith your local pastor, or the shepherd of your soul. He's just like, hey Fred, have you thought about it this way? Or what do you think the outcomes might be if you pursued this option? Or it's just beautiful way to work with me, because I don't work well with the others. When I was raised in college, I was actually a little older. I was an art minor, and we would do these life drawing classes and stuff. And one day the teacher had some business meeting or something down in his office, and so he like put a bowl of fruit or a vase or something in the middle of the classroom. He says, "Okay, I want you to all draw this till I get back, and I don't want to hear one peep out of any of you." I mean, we're college students. I'm probably like 25 years old, and I have this guy telling me I don't want to hear one peep out of you like I'm 5. And I never talked in class. I never caused problems. But the minute he walked out the door until he came back in, I could not keep my mouth shut. I was just gabbing it up. And there's something wrong with me, but I don't think it's just me. You know, the whole, you may eat of every tree of the garden, but of this tree thou shalt not eat. It's just like, yeah, what can you think of besides that one tree you can't eat of, right? At least me. It's so funny because it's painful. That's Kant.
That's good.
Isn't this great?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but this is usually when I have my talk about the difference between art and pornography too. I just think it works in nicely with the subject. So let's see how Kant works here. I was doing a humanities class for APS years ago, and I honestly thought the class was going to drag me out on the quad and light me on fire along with my art books. Just because I wanted to have this conversation. I was like, good Lord, people. All I asked them to do was to tell me what's the difference between sensual art, erotic art, and pornography. And you might say, Blackburn, why would we even need to know that difference? Right? If there's a nip showing, it's pornography. End of the story, end of discussion. At least that's what the little ladies at that other college I went to, library, thought. So they had taken a permanent marker pen, gone through all the fine art books in the library, and just put little black bars over any offending bits. It was hilarious. But I was also offended at the same time that they had disfaced all these incredible pieces of art. Anyways, you actually may need to know how to define these things, because the Supreme Court has refused to at least define what pornography is, and they have left it, and this could have changed since I checked last, but I don't think so. I think I would have noticed. I think they have left it up to local municipalities to decide what is pornography in their state. And you see this so clearly, like if you compare like what's permissible in East County as opposed to what's permissible on Rosecrans Boulevard, right, where the ships all come in. Yeah. They have a very different idea of what's adult and what's pornographic than they do in Alpine.
Right.
Okay. And I don't know, maybe that is a wise decision of the courts to leave it, because think how different we are in California from Alabama or Mississippi, right? So maybe a one-size-fits-all isn't the right idea for something like this. And I think it was Strom Thurmond who said, I can't define it, but I know what it is when I see it, right? I mean, it's funny, but it's not helpful. But a lot of these fights actually happen on school boards and PTA meetings where they're trying to decide curriculum or what kind of books to put in the library or what movies. And if you can't explain the difference between Michelangelo's David and Hustler magazine, there's a problem. Or is there? One more story while you're thinking. I want to hear if you can define these. When I was in elementary school, I went to this little private fundamentalist school called Valley Christian Academy. It's still there, Santa Maria, California. Shout out Santa Maria, First Baptist. And I'm probably in 4th, 5th grade, I can't remember. And I'm in the library. Even then I have a voracious appetite for art and things like that. And I'm looking through these Greek art books, and it's just nudity after nudity after nudity. These nude sculptures, right? And my dad was the principal of the school. And I ran immediately to the office. I was probably shaking, a little pale, and I said, Dad, there's dirty pictures. I didn't even know the word pornography. There's dirty pictures in the library. And he was like, really? And he took me very seriously. And when I showed him, he was like, oh, honey, no, that's art. And I just looked at him like, oh, is that what we're calling it nowadays? But how would you explain to a small child or an adult at the PTA meeting that, no, we're not exposing your child to pornography, this is art? And now you can see why I was drug out, or almost drug out into the quad. Let's start simple. What's sensual mean?
It's appealing to the senses, right?
Yes. So art that appeals to the senses.
Anything that looks good, tastes good, smells good.
It could be crushed velvet drapes to a still life of fruit. That is sensual art. Erotic art is actually a subcategory of sensual art. So erotic is?
Does it specifically appeal to like sexual
Correct.
appetite?
Yes.
Okay.
So anything that's intended to appeal to or arouse sexual senses is considered erotic. So that could be like Rodin's The Kiss, his bronze, the two lovers kissing. That would be considered erotic, not pornographic. But it's a step up from sensual.
Like the ecstasy of St. Therese.
Yes. Yes.
Is that erotic?
Yeah. She's having an orgasm in the middle of
But is it
St.
meant?
Peter's. That's in St. Peter's, isn't
But
it?
is it meant to arouse people sexually?
No. And that's what someone brought up in the other class. They said, well,
Is it the artist's intention?
Is
Or is it
intention,
the effect
yeah.
of the...
right, is it what the viewer is bringing to it, or is it what the artist meant by it? And that's a great case in point when you're trying to determine between these two, right? Because this is obviously just a more specific type of sensualism. This, though, it's not just about being sensual or arousing one sexually. There's something else happening here. And some people want to say, well, it's the intention that turns it from art into pornography. One of my wife's friends had a great response to this. She said, oh, that's easy. The difference between art and pornography is art's more expensive. Which is hilarious, but it doesn't help define the terms, right? Intention. This is how Larry Flint, the publisher of Hustler magazine, kept his magazine going and out of jail year after year after year. Because when cases would be brought that it was pornographic, and pornography is illegal in many parts of this country. And depending on where you live, it could be illegal. And he said, no, I'm an artist. I'm expressing myself. This is not only free speech, but it's art. And how dare you censor art or free speech? And that was enough to keep his really filthy magazine going for years. And it was so clearly pornography, I cannot believe he was able to defend his way out of it. But it's because people do not take the time to sit down and define what pornography is. And this is another weird thing about this. This is the one of the few areas that a radical feminist and a militant fundamentalist would agree on what pornography is. What odd people to have in the same camp. But it makes sense once you think about what pornography is and how it differs from art.
So does that have to do with objectification?
Yes, bingo.
Rather than celebrating beauty, you're
Turning someone
degrading.
else into an object of your sexual desire.
Mhm.
You're basically using them, violating the kingdom of ends. These people are no longer people, you have turned them into objects of sexual desire. Perfect definition. Now, why my students got all spun up about having this conversation, I didn't find out till later. And I said, just because there's a difference, I'm not saying you should have your topless mermaid shower curtain in the bathroom and you know, I don't care personally, but that might be a problem with certain I don't know. You don't have to have erotic art, you know, coffee table books out for the guests, but that's really kind of between you and Jesus, I think, with what level of art is permissible. But pornography is taking it to a whole different thing where you are actually degrading the humanity of someone made in the image of God, and you're just viewing them as an object of your lust or sexual desire. And if you can't see that that's wrong, Kant and I would say you are not thinking clearly. It's so obviously wrong. Kant goes so far to say you can objectify yourself, and you're not to do that. That's why he would say masturbation is wrong. Because you have now turned your own body, you have depersonalized yourself and turned your own members into sexual gratification. Amazing. I never heard an argument like that for masturbation. I think it's quite interesting. The only valid sexual outlet for Kant, see, that's why you can't use a prostitute, that's why you can't have premarital relationships. The only reason a marriage works is because even though objectification is taking place in the other, because the other belongs to you and you belong to the other, you find yourself in the one who is using you. Isn't that interesting? But without that mutual ownership or belongingness, one party is using the other, or both parties are using each other. And since they don't belong to each other, it doesn't complete the loop. So it's something interesting to think about. I mean, I don't know if I would go that far as Kant, but I certainly can appreciate his point. And I don't know about you, but that is really hard to watch or imagine when you see one person using another, whether it's sexually, whether it's exploiting their labor, whether it's exploiting their minds, you know, whatever it is, it's just so heinous to see that happen. Because we are not objects, we're subjects, and we need to be treated as such. Okay, critiques, real quick.
overtime.
I know, we gotta critique it though. If you gotta go, you can go.
Yeah.
What would be some of the potential problems of this one? We can do it pretty quickly. Because it's reason-based, it's gonna have the same problems any other reason-based is gonna have, right? Now, Kant would say, well, reason correctly, you won't have the problems. I wrote the books on them. But, I don't know, this is something even a child should be able to do, but I think what Kant didn't really get was, I think he was kind of ethnocentric. Because I don't think he traveled a lot. I think he lived in that little community where people looked like him, thought like him, not as well as him, but he never married, he never had children. I mean, he had a very limited kind of ivory tower, and as far as ivory tower ethics goes, I just think he knocks it out of the park. The problem is, yeah, don't lie, steal, cheat, torture, yeah, these are great. But where we're dealing with ethical dilemmas is down here in the gutter, where it's all messy, and how do you deal with that? So I'm worried about the rationalization that's possible with this. And yeah, Kant would say, well, don't rationalize. Reason purely and practically. The other problem I have is one of my professors at San Diego State was a world-class Kantian scholar, and she actually translated his Metaphysics of Morals from the German into English. And she knew Kant so well she would actually correct him in the lectures, like, oh, Kant's getting a little ahead of himself here. What he should have said was, and then this, and then that. When people ask her questions about Kant, it was like asking your theology professors questions about the Bible here, where they could give you chapter and verse, they know exactly where it's from, which writing, which chapter, and then their biggest problem is, do they want this answer or do they want this answer, right? And trying to discern what your student is really looking for. But in that class, we had a pretty openly homosexual guy, and he had a life partner. It was before you could legally marry same-sex marriage in California. But they were committed, they were trying to adopt a child together, all that. And like all of us, when we go through these different theories, he's plotting it against his own life. And like, well, how would I line up in a Kantian thing? And so he asked this scholar, he said, I'm assuming that Kant would say homosexuality is wrong. Because if you ask what I want all people in all places, all times to be homosexual, even a homosexual would have to rationally say no. It would be the end of the species as we know it. And the teacher really shocked me. She said, well, it depends. And I'm thinking, depends on what? Well, what am I missing? She says, it depends how you ask the question. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, what if you ask, would I want all people in all places at all times who have homosexual tendencies to practice homosexuality? Well, that's a very different question now. And I might answer yes to that one, where I, as well as open homosexuals, would have to categorically say no to the other one, if you're going by reason. But see, now it gets really tricky. Because now what if you ask, would I want all people in all places, all time, whose wife is dying of terminal cancer and has a child in chronic pain, to steal the medicine they need to save their loved ones because they have no health insurance? Well, yeah, I don't want to give up private property and condone stealing, but we're talking life and death now as opposed to profits or medicine. We're talking a life. And now it gets kind of messy.
Could you say that you could reason your way down to basically like situation ethics?
So it's back
Now Kant would be in his grave going like this, like, stop it, that you're doing it wrong. But see, you can't apply his to this world. It's like the Platonic ideal forms trying to apply them down in our brokenness. Does that make sense? Which I love Plato too. But you see how kind of elitist this sounds, right? For one thing, if you disagree with this, Kant would simply say you're not thinking correctly.
Right.
And who gets to say who's thinking correctly? Kant obviously thinks he gets to say. And if anyone gets to say, it probably should be Kant or Plato. But they're not always going to be around. This is supposed to be that internal compass, not what Kant decides, right? That's the whole point. This isn't being imposed on you from the outside. It's supposed to be coming from the inside. But you and I are going to ask very different questions. For example, many years later, when I was your guys' age, I went on another family vacation, this time with my grandma Blackburn, and it was to Mesa Verde, where the Anasazi ruins are, the cliff dwellings. And I was really into Native American religion and rituals at this time. And even more signs than at Morro Rock. Like, this is a archaeological site, it's a sacred site, it's all these things, don't touch, take nothing. And meanwhile, I'm up on top of the mesas gathering sacred sage into a bundle. And my grandmother, she's like, Fred Blackburn, what do you think you're doing? Oh, I hope this doesn't get me a ticket from the National Park Service. But she's like, Fred Blackburn, what do you think you're doing? And I'm just like, gathering sacred sage, grandmother, in a sacred way, in a sacred place. And she's just like, well, stop it. You're not allowed. It's protected. And I said, it's okay. I got permission. And she was like, oh, okay. And so we travel another half mile on top of this mesa, and she stops and she says, permission from whom? Because we haven't seen anyone all afternoon. She's like, there's no rangers. And I was like, why would I ask a ranger for permission? And she's looked at me, I said, I ask each sage plant, may I have some of your sage? Just like a Native American. And they said yes, and I'm taking it home. Because I asked myself, would I want all people, in all places, at all times, who have a deep and respect and love for Native American culture and religion, to take just what they need for purification rituals, not to sell, not to rape the land, not to make some gross profit? Would I want them to take it? And my answer was, absolutely. But, yeah, and I get it. Kant's saying, no, you're doing it wrong. But I'm just like, Kant, now you've become the standard. If you're get to say who's reasoning correctly, and if we're asking the right questions, it's not working now. But I will tell you, I will still use this theory when I'm having ethical discussions with people who aren't Christians, people who don't believe in the authority of scriptures or the work of the Holy Spirit, because it's at least something we can reach a lot of common ground on just by these two things. And this is what I would use at a PTA meeting. I wouldn't say, thus saith the Lord. I mean, that would be absurd, right? Half your audience would already be put out. Here you could simply ask them like, hey, do you think this would be a good idea for all our children in all their classes and where their development is? Or is this a way to protect our children and how much value we place in them? Or are we using them? Are we kind of manipulating them into who we want them to be or what we can get out of it? Great questions. And those are universal. All right, is that good?
Good.
All right, thanks for staying.
Good. Yeah, of course. Do you want to stop?